Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello, Glaudia. Hello, David.
Hi, Patricia.
Hi, Patricia.
Here we are again. So welcome, everyone. Today's webinar is how to address common team challenges with effective facilitation. We have Glaudia Califano and David Spinks based in the UK. They're two people I do enjoy collaborating with, sharing ideas, and we wrote a little book together that we'll mention here. So yeah, welcome everyone. Just some quick guidelines as we get started. Your microphones will be muted throughout. This session is recorded. Our marketing colleagues will get the recording and the slides up after we complete the webinar. Usually that's within 24 hours. And please ask questions. Many of you are probably familiar with this. Submit your questions into the Q&A icon. I'll be participating in today's webinar, but I'll also be moderating. So I'll be watching that Q&A. And if you put them in the chat, I won't see them as quickly. So put them in the Q&A, please. All right, so who is Scrum.org? Scrum.org is a mission-based company focused on helping people and teams solve complex problems. We do that for me in 3 ways: training, certification, validation, and learning. Part of that for me is also about the global community, which Glaudia and David and you are all a part of. And that gentleman on the slide I am showing is Ken Schwaber, who is not only the co-creator of the Scrum framework, but also the founder of Scrum.org. So 2 minutes, I think I got it done. I can pass it over to you, Glaudia, to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Patricia. Yeah, so my name is Glaudia. I am an agile practitioner. I currently work with a large insurance company, but I'm also a professional Scrum trainer and accredited Kanban university trainer since 2019. I think my first introduction into facilitation was through Lego Serious Play, which I absolutely love. So I am a Lego Serious Play facilitator as well. And as Patricia mentioned, we have written some books, which one of them we have written together with Patricia. So I'm based in the UK. I've got 2 sausage dogs, and that's me. And I'll hand it over to David now.
All right, thank you, Glaudia. Hey, everybody. So if we go on to the next slide, this is me. So my name is David Spinks. I am also a professional Scrum trainer and also a accredited Kanban university trainer as well. So I've been in the training space since about 2019. Kind of feels like a duplicate slide, I promise. We did work on this, but yeah, I did work on these books with Glaudia and Patricia as well. So Facilitating Professional Scrum Teams is the latest one that we collaborated on, and kind of essential to what we're going to talk about today. I'm from the UK, and I offer my training and consultancy services through my company, Red Tangerine. That's me.
That is you. But is it all? All right, so I'm Patricia Kong. I have been at Scrum.org, based in Boston for a very long time, probably 12 years now. I focus on enterprise agility. So evidence-based management, scaling the good things that can happen at a Scrum team. How do we get that to the rest of the organization? That comes out of my interest in organizational behavior, and I have a business background. Currently, I focus on a lot of learning enablement through Scrum.org. So I head our learning products, and I have also authored some books, and the facilitation one with Glaudia and David. The interesting thing to me, we're talking about facilitation, but if we flip that before we get started, it's all these challenges I think that we're going to talk about within the Scrum team. Or within the organization, and talk about the format that we're going to use today is say, hey, here's these things that happen inside a team, in a company. How does that look? Why does it show up? What are some different examples? And then we'll give some tips and some guidance. But before we get started, so we're going to go through 5. Hopefully we'll get through all 5 of these. These are common team challenges with group dynamics. Full transparency, we asked ChatGPT what those were. So these are the ones, and honestly, these are things that we talk about in our book too. So poor communication and misalignment, lack of psychological safety, low engagement and motivation. I see that somebody's already put in that they'd like to understand about low participation in Scrum events. Ineffective conflict management is the fourth one, and 5 is unclear roles and responsibilities. So we'll go through each one of those again, explain why this happens, how it shows up, and then give some tips on that. And then we'll talk about how facilitation, how we can look at different ways of improving the teaming. Frankly, it's a very human behavior that we're focused on. So the facilitation and how to really inspect and adapt and try different things will be at the core of what we talk about. And at the very, very core, Glaudia, is your passion, facilitation principles.
Yeah, so as Patricia said, I do think the facilitation principles are just something at its core because it's something that you can always fall back on. So often, including me, I sometimes get very excited by all these facilitation techniques that are out there, as I already mentioned when I saw Legacy's Play, for example. But there's a lot of facilitation techniques, tools, etc. And we do get very excited about it. But I think it's always to take a step back and look at the principles, like what is it that you can always fall back on? And that's these principles. So we can always when we facilitate something, regardless what tool, technique, or approach we take, we want it to be participatory. We don't want to feel that people feel that they cannot participate. Doesn't mean that everyone has to talk, doesn't mean that everyone has to talk at the same time, or as much as each other, I mean. But it means that we create an environment where everyone is really focused and can participate. And we want to create a healthy space for that so that people feel safe. Transparency, when we talk about the facilitation principle of transparency, it's very much about shared understanding. I think I've been quite a lot in meetings or in events where everything is, this is everything clear? And then we go back to a desk and actually everyone nods, yes, yes, we all understand. And you go back to your desk and actually then you come to the conclusion that people still have all kind of different ideas. So when we talk about transparency, it's like really helping people to create that shared understanding when facilitating. And in the end, we want it to be purposeful. We don't want people to get out of the Scrum event or out of a meeting thinking that this was just a waste of time, or we're never going to action anything up, or what was this actually about? It still needs to have a purpose. And all of those are encapsulated by the process, how you can make something participatory, healthy, transparent, and purposeful. So the reason why maybe Patricia said I was quite passionate about this is these are the things that you can just fall back on. Yeah, so always keep an eye on those, regardless what technique, what situation it is. Think about these ones.
Yeah, and we actually created a page together, didn't we? So we have the facilitation principles. There's much more in depth there on Scrum.org /resources. So on that URL, if people wanted to explore this with their teams alone. But this is something that is really important from an Agilist point of view, because if you don't have the techniques, it's really that behavior that you can fall back on, or that you might already feel you're exhibiting as a facilitator. So let's get into the first common challenge. So that's poor communication and misalignment. So what are some things that we know about it? Well, it's consistently called out as one of the top pain points. We aren't having the same conversations within teams. We're not having the same conversations. Our management doesn't understand what's going on. We're working on different things. And that misalignment costs companies hard money. So I think about a lot of times how fast people can make decisions as a product person. And when there's this misalignment, there's a lot that gets lost in productivity. So people always ask me about metrics, and a lot of that gets lost here when there's that miscommunication and misalignment. You've got to work on something, you do it again. Yes, Glaudia.
We're just seeing also, and I've got it as well, we do have a bit of a problem with the screen, so we can't really see the slides properly. It's flickering, it's very big, so we can't really see what you're sharing, Patricia, and I see some more people have it as well.
Okay. Is it coming through?
No, it's still, it's at least not flickering. And yeah, no, it's still flickering. It's there's something wrong. Maybe you just need to, up the slide deck again. I don't know.
Oh, that's strange. I've had the slide deck up for a while.
Yeah,
So
somewhat Claire already here says stop sharing and reshare. So
Yeah,
that should do the trick.
Yeah. Otherwise, we'll just
Thanks,
turn it
Claire.
off. Otherwise, we'll turn it off and back on again, right?
Yeah. Thanks for letting me know. Is that better?
Yes, much better.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right. So I said basically those 2 bullet points. So how does it show up, miscommunication and misalignment? There can be a misinterpretation of goals, and there can be different understanding of priorities. There's a lot of different ways that this can show up. But again, I talked about the different levels. One of the ways that I experienced this in a very real and costly way was I have a background in startup organization. So I was working at a startup, and we were getting a product out, hopefully hoping somebody would buy it. So we had some people biting in, and at the same time, we're working on getting funding. So us heading up product, we're really focusing on making our customers happy, reducing churn, keeping customers happy, maybe able to spread the word, that kind of stuff, right? Customer satisfaction, getting usage. Meanwhile, what we found out later was the things that we were focused on, the things that we were going to add to our service, to the product, were really misaligned with what our CEO cared about. Because the CEO was having a lot of tough conversations with the investor. And what he cared about wasn't really about usage and utilization and that kind of stuff. What he cared about was getting revenue in. So he had conversations with investors where they said, if you're not hitting this mark, we're not going to, how much we will invest will differ. So that's a really different understanding of priorities. And it's really just a lack of, when I think about this, besides us not having good communication, but from a product level, not really thinking and reaching out and being proactive about, hey, what are you thinking about? Why are you thinking about this? So really working on communication. And that's just one example from my background. I don't know if Glaudia or David, you have another example you'd like to share.
Yeah, I think one example that I always find really interesting is I work with a team, or when I start with a team and say, okay, for example, we have a discussion, who do we know who we're building for, who our customers is, and usually team member says, yeah, absolutely, and I said, let's create some proto-personas, or let's do some empathy mapping, and every individual does it, and what you will see is that often every team member comes up with a different user or customer actually in mind. So we often think we're aligned, that we know who we're building this for, or we often think we are aligned to the purpose of what we're doing. And it's only when you start digging deeper, when you facilitate those sessions, like I said, you do some empathy mapping, or you do, for example, you start creating a press release, we call it, where you say, where, if you would think about where our team would be in a year's time, if we would be in a magazine, what would that magazine say about us? You will find out when you facilitate those kind of activities that often team members think there's a disconnect, or there's a misalignment of what people think the purpose is. So it's just really interesting. So I think it comes back to when I talked about the facilitation principle of shared understanding as well. So when we're facilitating something, I would often paraphrase, summarize, really hit it home. But I think we have a lot of really nice tools and techniques as well to create an alignment, as you see on this slide. I think with all these tools, like an elevator pitch or tomorrow's headline, which is a bit like a press release, or product canvas, we have a lot of canvases around. I think they are really good tools, but I think there's one thing that we need to keep in mind. Those are tools to facilitate a conversation. The purpose is not to fill in a perfect elevator pitch. The purpose is not to have a perfect press release. The whole reason why we do this is create that shared understanding and get those conversations going. So, and these are quite nice tips. Dependency boards is an interesting one as well. I use dependency boards with teams often, and I kind of now say it's almost not about managing dependencies, It might be at the start, but eventually it's about eliminating dependencies. By visualizing your dependencies, you can often see where always the same dependencies are. And then you can put some continuous improvement. You could do your retrospective on it. And again, facilitating those discussions. So not just managing dependencies and see, oh, this is on the board, but actually facilitating those discussions about how can we reduce or even eliminate those dependencies. There's much more on here. I think we'll talk a bit about stakeholder mapping as well, when it comes to like, who are we actually, who should we communicate with? Who should we align with? Yeah, who should we collaborate with? Again, with a stakeholder map, what I would say, when I facilitate stakeholder mapping, I would like to do that collaboratively. It shouldn't be a product owner on its own, you know, on their own, just doing a stakeholder map. Again, the whole purpose of here is that you get those different perspectives and that shared alignment. The other thing that I would say with stakeholder mapping, especially in Scrum, is that it's a living artifact. Yeah, your product goal maybe changes, your stakeholders maybe change over time. So it's something that as a team you need to review quite often. Yeah, but this is kind of how do you create that alignment with your stakeholders and with the team? Yeah, that you know who you should collaborate with.
Yeah, I think that those, you know, the stakeholder map and the other one, like you said, they're really good tools for when we think about how do we start to communicate and how can we make sure that we are aligned. So that's great when we want to think about communicating in misalignment, but what about the environment, David?
Yeah, I think this is one of the other common things that we see in a lot of teams and organizations, this idea of psychological safety. I mean, it's a term that we use a lot in Scrum and in the Agile space. But it's one of these challenging things. How do you actually create psychological safety? What does it mean if you don't have psychological safety? But why is it so important? So it's interesting when we were sort of researching in preparation for the webinar that we saw that Google ran this project called Project Aristotle, which was all about what makes an effective team. And they found that psychological safety was one of the top predictors to say whether the teams are going to be high performing or not. So whether the team felt safe, whether they could speak out, etc. So when team members feel that they can speak up, that they can articulate their concerns or talk about the challenges, when people feel that it's okay to take risks, to admit mistakes, those are the teams that are really high performing. So it's an important thing to think about. How can we facilitate psychological safety? I remember working at one company where, again, and this is a common thing that we hear lots of stories about, and we've all had this experience as well, where the company kind of says, yeah, you can do what you want, you're free to experiment, there are no limits even. But when you actually start to do something, you try something out, you experiment, and you actually find that actually there are boundaries there. They just weren't defined, they were a little bit invisible. And that makes it very confusing what you can do or not. And then that sort of, again, breaks the trust and it breaks that sense of psychological safety. I remember one sprint, one of the teams wanted to experiment with trying out some automation during their sprints. And even though they learned a lot from, about automation tools, they kind of meant that they compromised their sprint a little bit and they didn't actually deliver their done increment. That team was then pulled into a room by senior management and kind of lambasted and blamed and really questioned, why did you not deliver during your sprints? We're expecting an increment every sprint. Why didn't you deliver? So effectively they were punished despite this rhetoric that it was safe to try things, to experiment with things. So again, there was this sort of disconnect between what management was saying versus the actual behavior. So how can this become, how does this cause a problem? How does this show up in terms of issues? So if people are feeling like they're going to be punished for trying things out or not speaking up, it means that underlying impediments might remain unaddressed. In that particular team's case, there was an issue with quality. There was an issue with the burden that they had to do things manually. and there hadn't been an investment in automation over time. But because the team were punished for starting that experiment, that impediment, again, people would just, put it down, not go back to it, and effectively not be addressed. So when there are impediments, people are reluctant to seek help, reluctant to call things out. And there is this fear of failure. What if we do try an experiment and it doesn't work? What if we do invest in that automation and we go no quicker, or it actually slows us down in the short term? We also talk about feedback a lot, and maybe we don't talk about psychological safety enough when it comes to feedback. But a lot of teams put a lot of their passion and work into the products that they're developing, and we're putting it out there in sprint reviews for feedback. So again, there's that fear of what does it mean to be criticized effectively for products that not meeting customer expectations. So how can we facilitate those feedback sessions in a way that's safe and constructive, rather than feeling like we're being punished or there's blame being thrown around? When there's a lack of psychological safety, it means that decisions are kind of made by the people that are a bit more dominant, the voices that are more dominant. Maybe people with job titles that are seen as the ones with more authority. And again, it means that we're cutting out the input and the innovation from a wider group of people. There could be some smart ideas that are lying dormant because people are afraid to speak out. So when decisions are made, because people are kind of going along with it, it means that there's this term that we use, weak buy-in to the decisions. The decision has been made and everybody's going along with it, but are they really committed to the decision? So all of this can lead to stagnating teams and low innovation in terms of the effectiveness and performance of the team. So what can we do to address this?
David, just a quick, as you talk through some of these tips, there's a question. So Glaudia had talked about stakeholder mapping, and one of our attendees is saying, hey, that's a great technique, but what happens if you can't get that information where you don't feel like you're in an environment that has enough psychological safety where you can even get access to that or feel comfortable contacting or, understanding who the different stakeholders are?
Yeah, I think the stakeholder the stakeholder map that we saw earlier is a good starting point to identify all the different parties. And once we can understand their role on our product, are they someone that could have a high impact on it? Will they have a high influence on it? We can start to think about the different strategies that we can come up with. In Scrum, we use this term stakeholder, and it's such a big term, right? Anybody outside the Scrum team that could have an influence or be impacted by your product, right? So, but it doesn't mean that just because we call everybody a stakeholder that they should be treated the same. So I think the first point is mapping it and then understanding those different levels of interest and influence on the product, and then start to think about different strategies on how we kind of work with these different stakeholders. I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to that. It's that process, I think, of going through, of identifying the stakeholders and coming up with the relevant strategies.
I'm just thinking, because one other nice thing to do as well, I think it comes from game storming, where they take a spin a bit on stakeholder mapping and they call it who do. So maybe if you don't really know who your stakeholder, or maybe it's, like I said, it's not a psychological safe space to call it out, it's maybe have a look, who do you need on your product, and what do they do? What I mean to say is, for example, we need finance because they will approve the budget. We need IT because they will build this. So it doesn't have to, just to start with that, instead of saying names or anything, it's saying, what do you actually need? What is the feedback you need? So it's more the do part maybe that you start on. What do we actually need on our product? We need user feedback. We need it to be budget. We need money for it so we can keep on going. We need people to test it out. It's all these things. So maybe start with that, and then slowly start identifying that. That could also be a way to do it.
Yeah, and I think it's framing it, as you say, like a collaboration, right? Rather than a them versus us. What's that relationship, that two-way relationship that we need in order for the product to be a success? Yes, the Scrum team is the one developing it, building it, and sustaining it, etc. But stakeholders have that part to play, right? In order for the product to be successful, we need that collaboration between both parties, really. So again, as facilitators, how do we facilitate that relationship, really? So going back to some of the tips then, so I think the first thing that we can do as facilitators, as Scrum Masters, as team members even, is being an example, right? So I think we kind of take our cues, our values from those around us as well. So if we can start to embody the sorts of values and behaviors that we'd like to see, then I think that can be a good starting point as well. So leading by example through things like the Prime Directive. This is a statement from the book from Kurth Norm on project retrospectives. Regardless of what we discover, we understand and truly believe that everyone did the best job that they could, given what they know at the time, their skills and abilities, the resources available, and the situation at hand. So I always use this with a team that I'm working with for the first time to kind of just set that background context of, let's come from a place where assuming everybody's doing their best. Let's assume that we are dealing with complexity here. There's going to be unknown information out there. We're doing our best with the skills and abilities that we've got. So assume that people are doing their best. I won't read them out, but we've also got Amy Edmondson's 3 principles as well. We talk about that in the book a little bit more, but effectively these are sort of guiding principles that help us to think about how we behave and how we interact with others. Other things we can do, just how we use language as well, right? There's how we ask questions. I can ask a very closed question to a team, for example. Is it going to, can you get this done for me by Christmas or by the end of August, right? That's a very closed question, right? I'm kind of putting them on a spot a little bit, right? Compare that to asking the team, when do you think this could be completed, right? So the way that we phrase questions can impact that sense of psychological safety. When we look at psychological safety within a team, so it goes back to a little bit what we were talking about earlier when it comes to communication, having clear understanding of how we are going to work together as a team, getting that facilitated as a workshop and creating a team working agreement. So this could be anything from these are the times that we meet for our daily Scrum, to the communication channels that we use, to expectations on when individuals might not want to be disturbed so they can focus. So all sorts of things can go into the team working agreement so that there is that sort of understanding of how we're going to work together. I'm a big fan of getting feedback anonymously. So again, a big part of facilitation is how do we get to the objective that we're trying to do? Having an open discussion as a group, again, can lead to dominant voices dominating the proceedings. But if I get people to brainstorm individually through individual writing their ideas on Post-it notes, putting them on a wall, we can critique the idea or the thought as a collective, rather than and take it away from where it's come from, who said it. So again, very simple but powerful way of trying to create that safety, this idea of anonymous writing. Again, how we frame questions, we've got something called How Might We? We'll talk about that more in a second. But again, if we are going to address concerns, if people are raising things, we need to identify actions, and it's up to leaders, change agents, facilitators to ensure that actions are followed through. So let's just have a quick look at the How Might We question on the next slide.
Will do. Before we get there, for either of you, now I know that we think of a team agreement absolutely as an artifact, right? Or they revisit it and modify it. There's a question here about how often do you suggest that happen?
It's a bit like how long should your sprint be, right? I think it's going to be context specific. If there's a lot of change going on, we'd probably be doing it more regularly. If it's a new team going through sort of forming stages, we might want to maybe revisit in the early days of a team forming every retrospective. Again, take it to the team. Maybe you can have some sort of suggestion box that team members could post suggestions into anonymously. And at the retrospective, for example, we could open that box. If there's anything in there, let's discuss it then and there. If not, then we can move on to discuss other things, really. So I don't think there's a wrong or right answer. But again, I would be trying to take that prompt from the team as much as possible as well. But yeah, I would say if it's once every year, that's probably not frequent enough.
I think, like you said, Dave, it depends on change as well. New people joining, it's those kind of things as well. I'm just thinking, because I did see another question in the QA about the open questions. And I was just, because it was something that I thought about as well when you talked about psychological safety, David. It's like the why question can be a slippery slope. So because people can often get very defensive if they say why is this? So we often say open questions. We say often start with how, when, what, where, those kind of phrasing those in an open way, or the how might we is a great way as well, that which David talked about. What the question why, I'm not saying starting at why is a bad thing, but be careful with it because it's a bit slippery slope and it can get people to become defensive. So I thought I'd throw that in.
I agree with that. And I think it'll come up around goals. And there's the 5 whys technique, 5 why, but you have to be careful with that technique that you don't get with an adult to adult, seeming like a child. Why, right? You're going to get it if you do that. So David, as you think about the how might we, if you can go through it quickly, we do have a question that maybe you can frame while you talk about this. So this question is, how do you deal with teams that have a low psychological safety because there's been lingering conflict that hasn't been addressed properly? And even when there's been mediation coaches and all sorts of things like that.
Yeah, it's a common question. How do we deal with conflict? I mean, this is something we teach in one of our Scrum.org courses as well, right? Conflict is part of group dynamics. We have to accept that. And we actually want a certain level of conflict because it means that people are challenging each other's ideas. If we're going to solve complex problems, we want to critique ideas, make sure that the ideas are robust. The problem comes when we go over a line and it's no longer critiquing an idea and it starts to become criticism of individuals. That's the line that we've crossed. Once you cross that line, it becomes really hard. So the ideal is that we are facilitating these conversations in a way that we don't go over the line in the first place. If we have gone past that, again, we can, it sounds great that there's been some mediation discussions. Again, I think transparency, there's a tool called feelings and needs cards, which we talk about in the book. It's quite detailed, so I won't go into it now, but it's getting to people really open up. And I think one of the big things is when there's conflict, it's because we're not understanding where the other person is coming from. And what I mean by that is we don't understand what their need is, what they're feeling. So a tool like the feeling and needs cards is about really building empathy with each other a little bit more. I just saw Glaudia come off mute, so I know this is one of okay.
No, not at all.
But yeah, the key is empathy, and people confuse empathy with cooperation. Empathy is like, can we really understand and feel each other? But sometimes, again, if we're at the extremes of conflicts, sometimes it's, again, we do all the coaching we can, but it can get to the place of point of no return. But like I say, the main thing is, can we try to get people to understand and empathize with each other?
Excellent. So we're going to hit, I think, our third common challenge that we found. So Glaudia, you're going to go with this. And there's been several questions in here just asked request to share about how to increase participation specifically during the events. I know that you're working with your Scrum teams. What are some things you can share here?
Yeah, so right, so just a couple of examples. I think when there's low engagement, as we already see on this slide as well, it leads to poor results, low innovation, high turnover. People are just not bothered. I'm out maybe out of these Scrum events thinking, why was I even here? So just as an example, I had a team, like a Scrum team, where at a company. And it was like, oh, I have to go to the retrospective again, and it was like, what is the use of the sprint planning? And so instead of like, we sometimes think like, oh, well, they're mandatory in Scrum, but instead of saying they're mandatory in Scrum and you have to do it, it's trying to understand why there's low engagement, why people don't actually want to go there, because often it is because it misses the purpose of the event, or maybe there is some conflict within the team, or anything that happens. So what I usually do, what I did with that team is I got them beforehand, for example, before we went into retrospective, I got them to map anonymously what they thought the value of each event was. Yeah. So did they think high value, they got high value out of the sprint review? Did they think they got low value out of the sprint review, high value retrospective, etc.? So we took that within the retrospective and then really addressed those things. Why did people think they had low value of it? Why was there not that engagement or participation? And I worked on that. That's one thing. So it's trying to find out why there's low engagement. Sometimes there's also low engagement, for example, in the sprint review, just purely because you don't have the right people in your sprint review. So maybe there's loads of people coming who actually maybe are not even, shouldn't even be there, but they're on their list and they're just being invited and they trot along. So having a look, are you actually inviting the right people at the right time, I would say. The other thing is with sprint reviews, what a really nice tip is that you can beforehand ask stakeholders, if you invite them, how they can contribute, how they believe, what value they believe they will bring to the sprint review. How can they contribute to the sprint review? If their answer is already like, I can't contribute anything, maybe they already decided they're not the right people, but it also gets people to start thinking how they can contribute, and you can start your sprint review with that as well. So you could even like do it as a warm-up activity where you get like stakeholders coming together saying, how can I make sure that this sprint review is going to be a success? How can I contribute? The one other thing as well, and it's on here, this is what I'm very passionate about, is sometimes, because there's so many reasons why people are maybe not engaged. So it's trying to find it out why. But sometimes people are not engaged because they don't feel listened to, or they find that their ideas always being dismissed anyway. I am a big fan of, it's called chart writing and scribing, but what it just is so if people come up with ideas, or you actually have a discussion, that as a facilitator, you make sure it's visually written down somewhere, so that everyone can see it. And the reason for that is that often people can't let go of their ideas and are open to somebody else's idea, because they're stuck on their own ideas. But when they see it written down, they feel listened to and they can move on and participate. So giving other people a choice as well to actually be engaged and participate within the event. Dominant voices, so or maybe having a senior person. What you could do is, for example, when it comes to decisions or voting, or etc., if you have a really senior person in the team, or that people, you think that you will end up having groupthink, one of the things that you, for example, could do is let that person do the vote, take the last vote, for example, or be the person who speaks last. When you have a really dominant voice in your group, facilitation wise, you can also say like, let's hear from the people I have not heard from yet. Yeah, no, just open it up to the group. It's little things like that. Also, usually breaking people down in smaller groups to start with. I had a Scrum team, and it wasn't that big, maybe 8 people, but we did have some team members who didn't like to talk that much straight away in the 8 groups. So we just put them in pairs first. You can do 1, 2 for all or something, and put them in pairs first, and then put them in a group. So it's just making sure that they all, you know, have an ability to be engaged. So usually breaking things down as smaller groups helps with engagement as well. And I talked way too much now, so I'm handing over to Patricia. I'm sorry, I got excited.
No. And there's several questions. If I haven't gotten to them, we've saved some time, so we're getting through these to go through them. One of the things that you mentioned, Glaudia, that made me think about one of the just kind of general tips that or ways that I think about facilitation is that it's not really just a skill for, let's say, a Scrum Master or a team member or even a product owner. I really think that facilitation is a great skill for leaders or managers to learn also. And because Glaudia was talking about the hierarchy and the louder voices, what I sometimes like to do is suggest that person facilitate the event, because they're going to have to step back. They're going to have to be neutral. They're not going to anchor. And that gives space if they can clearly, communicate that they're acting as the facilitator there. So just another way to think about it. Perfection game is one of the tips that Glaudia had on this slide. And so several of you are probably familiar with the perfection game. You may have used it in your retrospectives. I've used it a lot in terms of getting user and customer feedback. So during my time at Scrum.org, I've created a lot of new courses or new ideas that we put out into the public. And so you can even imagine sometimes when we're beta testing this with our professional Scrum trainers, these new courses, we need to get that feedback. And so the perfection game is something that you can get feedback, and it's really geared toward 2 things. One, how do I make this better, perfect? And how do I frame the feedback so that somebody's in a positive mindset, and that I'm in a positive mindset when I'm receiving it, so that we can find out what can be improved in a constructive way. And so I even use this actually in surveys now. But one of the ways that I've seen this happen is one of the times we were creating, getting feedback. And at that point, I usually just ask people, rank it from 1 to 10. And for that course, we were consistently getting 9s and 10s. And then we said, you know what, this isn't really helpful because I'm not really learning enough to see what to improve. So we just used the perfection game, ask them to rate it. Now, something that's important to understand is 1 to 10 isn't 1, I don't like this, 10, I love it. It's how much value you're getting. So if you're putting an 8, that means you find this value 80% valuable, 20% can be improved. Start to frame things like that, same exact product, the ratings actually started to get lower, but they started to give us more constructive, more helpful feedback on what could get it higher to make it to the 10 or the 100%. So that's something that I've used a lot generally when getting user feedback on products. But also I've done perfection game at the end of a sprint in a sprint review, sprint retrospective, also at a sprint review. All right, so this 4th one, there's a lot of questions around this one too, but it's around ineffective conflict management. So this is the 4th challenge.
Yeah, so we've kind of touched upon this already, right? And we get it all the time in our training classes for Scrum Masters, for the facilitation class. How do we deal with conflict management? So I don't want to repeat myself too much, but there's kind of like 2 patterns that we see. The pattern that we saw earlier, where conflict has gone beyond a point and the team is kind of like self-destructed. The inverse of that is where teams avoid conflict in the first place. They are effectively doing what we might term artificial harmony, where teams think any form of conflict is bad and any sort of disagreement is nipped in the bud. So as a facilitator, we kind of want to find this middle ground where we've got what we call healthy conflict. If we come back to our facilitation principles of healthy, and as I said earlier, this is about critiquing ideas, not criticizing individuals. So in terms of facilitating this, how do we make sure we're watching for the language? There's a difference between saying, I disagree with this idea because of this, versus I think you're wrong, right? So that's where we might need to step in as a facilitator and kind of like get people to cool off or challenge the way that people are sort of interacting with each other a little bit. So like I say, to deal with conflict is like we want to allow it to a certain level so that we get the innovation because people are challenging each other's ideas, but we don't want it to go over the line of people it's starting to get destructive. So what can we do about it? Well, like I say, the one thing is to not in, to we don't want to ignore it, right? If there is conflicts festering in the unhealthy way, we don't want to let it fester. We don't want to sort of brush over it. We want to get out in the open, discuss it, start to get empathy with each other. A big part of facilitation is helping groups of people understand each other's perspectives, right? It's not rushing to a resolution, rushing to the solution. We want to go through the process of helping people understand each other's perspectives. So we don't want to just brush over it and, leave it to fester. But if we don't deal with it, there can be other ramifications. Like I say, these small issues can become big issues, and this could be within the team, between teams. That's a common one that we see in organizations, between the teams and their stakeholders. And all of this can just, be a slow everything down in terms of decision making and getting stuff done, really. So some tips, Patricia.
May I ask a question, Glaudia, as you get into these tips? So I don't know why this like a bad apple, because it's not that. But there's a question in here, and I think it touches on participation and it touches on conflict. How do you deal with a single team member who continually challenges team dynamics or working modes and pushes for change that everybody else is going to stay silent on, and this is public? And I'm not sure you would build an empathy map, so.
I don't think so. I do think maybe it sounds, well, it depends, of course. That person can get frustrated as well, and then the team gets frustrated as well, isn't it? So I think it's then it's a bit of a difficult one. I think it might even be, but I'm not sure what David says. It depends on how the behavior shows, but it might even be having a discussion, facilitating discussion with this person, but also with the team itself as well. And because if they're pushing for change, there's probably a reason why they push for a certain change. So it might be, and it might be just also, why do the other team members not feel safe to speak up? So I think I just can't really give an answer on the spot. David maybe is a bit better than me.
I think I'm always a little bit cautious to kind of like think about individuals and label people as the bad apple, because maybe they've got genuine concerns which are valid, right? Maybe they've spotted something that does need some further investigation. So I think, again, big part of facilitation is staying neutral.
Yeah.
Right. So we need to cast aside our own judgment. I saw another question in the Q&A about what to do when we think a team member isn't pulling their weight. Right? Again, it's not for us to judge, right? When it comes to facilitation, it's to facilitate the process of the group interacting with each other. So really, we should be exploring what is behind that behavior, right? Individuals are not impediments, right? It's the behaviors. So we got to start getting the group to explore what's behind that behavior. So can we really try to build empathy with that person and their behaviors to try to get to the understanding of the why? Because that's the thing that we need to get to.
And that's why it's important that facilitation is really regarded as a skill, because so somebody here, nice suggestion, they're suggesting 1, 2, 4 all. I think in addition to it depends, it's really, Glaudia, you and I talk about this, and David, we did in the book, it's that you would layer techniques, right? You don't usually just do one technique. There's a layer trying to get to that outcome, and that's a big part of process when we talk about facilitation. So do we feel good about sharing these tips on conflict management, Glaudia?
I think there's one thing that might not be on here on the conflict. I think if you're in the middle of massive like you literally in your retro or things, or you're in a planning and really conflict does burst out, it's usually, like we say, the first thing to do is take a break. So it's just literally take a break. It's like in facility, if it really like if things really get heated up, just take a break, let people calm down. You know, it's just walk outside, get your brain, because when we get all heated up, there happens something to our brain, you know, and just.
We used to talk about that with Todd Miller a lot. That is a facilitation technique.
It is,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And there's some psychology behind it, right? There's the part of our brain, the emotional part of our brain is the bit that engages before our logical part of our brain. So the whole thing of like calm down, count to 10, actually works because of the way that our brains work. We react emotionally before logically.
All right, so we have 10 minutes left. This isn't a picture of an empathy map. This is a technique, another canvas that we Agilists love that people can go through. But maybe I'll move on to the last challenge and go through some of these great questions that are here. Is that okay? All right, so the fifth challenge that we gathered was around unclear roles and responsibilities. So I think about this in two ways. So unclear roles and responsibility, there's some ambiguity about what we're supposed to be doing or what we're meant to be doing. And outside, within an organization, I've been, again, in small organizations and big organizations. Some of you have worked in small organizations and big organizations. And I think we've seen that where somebody's just like, hey, I thought I was supposed to just be doing this box. This is what I do. And then you might go into another organization where somebody is just very, very eager to do a lot, and you're not really sure what they're doing too. So there's that. But where I've really seen it within Scrum teams is in these different ways. Is within the Scrum team, sometimes we don't really understand what that box is. We're trying to put a box around it. But I've seen people who are new to a team. I was in a team like this where I was product owner, and there was somebody from outside of our Scrum team who didn't really understand what it meant when I was saying, hey, this is the direction we're going. They would always question that and try to go above. And so that's really about having some education and some conversation around that. We've seen people who understand their role as a Scrum Master to be not what a Scrum Master is meant to be. We've seen it. I mean, typically a lot of people talk about the project manager, you know, or the admin. I've also seen it that they've kind of come out as the HR manager. And so again, I think that's really about education, another conversation. Developers on a Scrum team is interesting. The way that I've seen this in unclear roles and responsibility is that lack of understanding of collaboration. So I am only doing this. I am only doing testing. And the reason that I sometimes will see this, have been exposed to this a lot, is because how people are rewarded within a team. So if a tester is only being rewarded for how many bugs they can find and how many bugs they can fix, then that's going to break up some of that collaboration, and it's going to create unclear roles and responsibilities and accountabilities within a Scrum team. So those are kind of things that can hurt. Different things to think about there is, for me, really surface the ambiguity, really talk about what does it mean when we're in a team, focus on goals, re-education about what does it mean when you're talking about a Scrum team and how we work together and what those different accountabilities are. If some of you are familiar with Management 3.0, delegation poker, again, just a technique to have different conversations. And define roles collaboratively. We're not talking about in a hierarchy way, but how do you work together? What does it mean that we have accountability? Think about the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. Think about, for me, I think about the goals and the measurements. How will we know if we're working in an empirical way? And sometimes you won't be always sure. There's not always a black and white line. And some people are more comfortable with that and some people are not. So regularly inspect and adapt, and try to be somebody that can lead by example within that space. So we have some tips for facilitators, which was a little bit of bonus, and these might come up. But rather than read off the slide, I would love to just kind of go through maybe a few of these questions? Have you been looking at them? Are there any that you'd like to talk through?
I just think one of them was quite early on, which is quite relevant to something that's on here, is what is the difference between like a facilitator in Agile or in Scrum team versus like, you
It's
know,
on that,
yeah.
a process facilitator.
Yeah. So, and I think I think that we did talk a lot about staying neutral. Yeah, and not you know, you're not really participating usually as a facilitator. You're usually net neutral and you guide a team to a certain outcome. Now in Scrum there is something tricky there, because when you do your retrospective, for example, the whole Scrum team participate in the retrospective. So often retrospectives that can be facilitated by anyone, doesn't have to be the Scrum Master, but often that's done by the Scrum Master. However, the Scrum Master is also part of the Scrum team and should be able to participate. So what we usually say is in that case, then whoever is, or if it's a developer, whoever is facilitating the retrospective, just have to make it very clear when they've got the facilitator hat on and when they're actually their team member hat on. Yeah. So there's pros and cons, or you would say you get someone else outside the team to facilitate for you, but you have pros and cons with that as well, of course, because maybe the team doesn't feel as safe and maybe that's not always feasible either. So I would say that's probably where your biggest difference is. That in Scrum, some of those Scrum events, you would expect the whole team to participate, and that often means that one of the team members who's facilitating might also need to participate, and having that balance and making that very clear.
That was helpful. It can be tricky.
Yeah.
David?
What are some techniques to have more feedback questions from the stakeholders during sprint review? So we actually talk about this scenario in the book, which you can put on screen if you like, Patricia.
Oh,
yeah. So one thing that's worked for me, real life example, is we call it putting the stakeholder in the driving seat. So effectively, we're getting to the sprint review. We've got our latest done increments, and we want that feedback from stakeholders. What do you think of it? How would you use it? So rather than just demonstrating it, we actually put them in front of the laptop or the computer with the mouse, and we set them a task. Right, what we want you to do is to, I don't know, book a hotel room or buy this product through our e-commerce site, whatever it is, right? But we're setting them a task. Here's the product, and it's about observing. So the feedback is, how intuitive is it? Do they know what to do without us telling them? All right, so getting them actually interacting with the product, and the feedback is how we observe their behavior. So it's not just a one-way demonstration, it's that interactive session. So that for me is one of the most effective ways of getting that feedback that we need from the stakeholders on the product to actually get them to use it, by setting them a task to complete, not just to follow a script that they're either just passively watching or just following blindly. So that's the one that's worked really well for me.
I think that's an excellent point, that it's a two-way street. So if you're just going to flick up a mural or a PowerPoint just to show something, you're probably not going to get the same level of engagement each time, all the time. I think we could do one more question. We have 2 minutes.
I think it probably encapsulates a bit more questions, but one thing that we didn't discuss about is, and that I would really recommend people look into, is Sam Kainer's diamond of participatory decision making. Because I do see some questions: what if my ideas, or what if always the person has their own ideas and certain people don't talk, etc. So the diamond of participatory decision making is very much about diverging. So how can we get a lot of different perspectives and then converging it, but often in that in between, he calls it the groan zone. You have this thing that people can't let go of their ideas, or here in this example, for example, this person that always want their idea to be done. So it's kind of navigating the groan zone. So again, that's in our book as well. We talk about it, but also have a look at some blogs on Scrum.org about Sam Kainer's diamond of participatory decision making, which really talks about how to navigate those people through that groan zone, so that everyone's ideas actually gets integrated.
That's excellent. Actually, yes, a lot of these questions, they probably haven't made it through the groan zone, or they got right up to it and they didn't come back around.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. So thank you, Glaudia. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. Excuse me for the flickering screen, and that's never actually happened to me in all the ones that I've done. So I'm glad we made a recovery. I see that we still have several questions, over 20 questions that are unanswered. I apologize for that, but what we do have is we have a community podcast. So maybe in the future, we can address a lot of these questions through a podcast or through blogs or something like that. So be sure that we'll get some answers to you in some way. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day, and Scrum on.